A few minutes later, Lu Sheng and Snowy approached the Dong family villa, and something caught their attention, making their eyes fill with curiosity and surprise. 3 high-ranking generals appeared. Among them was Snowy's father. They formed up and with a serious gaze introduced themselves as Dong Chengding, Qin Hao, and Wang Hedong and greeted the god of war with respect. Lu Sheng turned around and began to observe the generals in silence. Our boy was not alone. At his side were Qin Shizhong and Snowy. A crowd of high-ranking soldiers approached the area. Snowy put her hands over her mouth and went into shock as she realized that Lu Sheng was truly the god of war. Lu Sheng's eyes began to shine with joy. With a kind smile, he extended his hand and told his father-in-law that it was not necessary to do this, suggesting entering the villa and talking inside. Chengding's attention was fixed on our boy and his eyes widened in surprise. With a smile, he nodded. General Qin Hao's eyes filled with rage and his gaze fixed on Lu Sheng. He couldn't help but grit his teeth and feel furious since Chengding had such an incredible son-in-law as Lu Sheng. Wang Hedong's attention was fixed on Chengding and his eyes expanded in surprise, realizing that this time old Dong had hit the jackpot. The eyes of the generals and soldiers widened in fear. They could not believe that someone as young as Lu Sheng was the god of war and the #1 martial saint. Upon observing closely, they also noticed that the one next to Lu Sheng was the daughter of the Dong family. They knew that this time the Dong family was going to become rich. In front of the Dong villa there was a large crowd of people. Most were young women. With an angry expression, a blonde woman began to push the other women, making it clear that the daughter of the Dong family was not a goddess. If she had been able to captivate the god of war, she thought she also had chances. The attention of the woman who was next to her focused on her and her eyes widened in confusion. She couldn't believe that the Qin family wanted to get ahead again. The women began to push each other, swearing that the god of war was theirs. Among them there was a man dressed as a woman. With a loving gaze he tried to capture Lu Sheng's attention. The red-haired woman's eyes filled with confusion and surprise. For her this was a joke, so she asked if he had also come to join the commotion. The man turned around and with a gaze full of determination said that he was not going to know if he didn't try, since the taste of great characters was unpredictable. The woman's attention fixed on him and her mind filled with confusion. Instead of continuing the conversation, she remained silent. The crowd of women began to surround Lu Sheng. Qin Shiyun began to observe them and his eyes widened in surprise, leaving him in shock. He remembered that Lu Sheng had said he was a general. He could not believe that in reality our boy was the god of war, realizing that Lu Sheng always knew how to surprise people. Thinking this, his eyes filled with joy, and he could not help but laugh out loud. Qin Shiyun approached him and could not help but feel somewhat surprised upon knowing that his brother was the friend of the god of war. Qin Shiyun closed his eyes, began to point at himself with his thumb, and while his nose was growing like Pinocchio's, with a proud smile he asked his older brother not to worry, since from now on, he was going to take care of him. He put his hand on his forehead and with a smile apologized to Wang Yao for having underestimated him all this time. Wang Yao, who was standing next to him, turned around and his eyes widened in confusion, and he couldn't help but sweat, giving a thumbs up. Qin Shiyun remembered that Wang Yao had dared to compete with the god of war for a woman, and had even gone looking for someone to give the god of war a beating. According to Qin Shiyun, Wang Yao was someone impressive and he was willing to call him the man with the most guts in the Dragon Kingdom. Upon hearing this, Wang Yao stepped back and couldn't help but feel afraid, his face filled with panic and his eyes with tears. He began to scream and swore that he wasn't someone like that. He fell to his knees on the ground and put his hands on his head. He was so scared that his soul left through his mouth. Everyone approached him and began to observe him in silence. 3 days later, there was a luxurious cruise sailing on the sea. Inside were Lu Sheng and Snowy lying on hammocks. Lu Sheng, who wore sunglasses, put his hand behind his head, took a cocktail and decided to ask her a question. His future father-in-law was a level 8 Grand Martial Master. Lu Sheng's family was ordinary. They had no money or power. He didn't know how to make his father-in-law gladly accept that he would marry his daughter. Lu Sheng began to drink the cocktail, and just before she could answer the question, With a smile, he revealed that the answer was very simple. He had to become a martial saint. Lu Sheng left the cocktail on the table, and she asked him to stop showing off. She couldn't believe that Lu Sheng had hidden being a martial saint. Our boy said it hadn't been his intention. Our boy stood up, rested his hand on the cruise railing, and his eyes filled with joy as he looked at the sea. A calm smile appeared on his face since it had been a long time since he felt so relaxed. He didn't know when he could bring his family to enjoy some time together. Snowy approached him, and while she was touching her hair, she began to contemplate the sea and with a smile asked if Lu Sheng wanted her to send someone for them right now. With a sincere gaze, Lu Sheng said that it wasn't necessary since he didn't have much time now. Lu Sheng activated his powers and martial energy appeared in his eyes. Not far from the ship, evil energy began to emerge from the bottom of the sea. Lu Sheng put on his usual outfit, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and while his eyes were shining with calmness, he revealed that he would come every 7 days from now on to this place, asking her to wear civilian clothes. Snowy's attention was fixed on Lu Sheng and her eyes widened in confusion and surprise. She did not know what he had in mind. She gave Lu Sheng a kiss on the cheek and asked him to take care of himself, promising to wait until he returned. Lu Sheng's eyes began to shine with joy, and with a smile, he nodded his head. Without wasting any more time, Lu Sheng jumped into the water and little by little began to submerge deeper into the sea, first descending 5,000 meters, then 10,000 meters until finally descending about 20,000 meters. The pressure at this depth was very high. But for Lu Sheng this was no problem. Something began to shine intensely and Lu Sheng's attention was fixed on it. It was a rift surrounded by evil energy. Lu Sheng approached it and began to observe it carefully. Although he had already given instructions to the army to reinforce surveillance and exploration of all the large underground rifts, he did not know if they could really find clues about that apocalyptic crisis, since he learned that a planet-scale threat was approaching. He felt as if he had a stone crushing his heart. There were still 8 years left before the apocalyptic crisis arrived, and at this stage there wasn't much he could do. Even if he found the source of the crisis, he wouldn't have enough power to do anything about it now. Lu Sheng's eyes filled with seriousness and determination. If the apocalypse came with soldiers, he would face them with soldiers. If it came with water, he would face it with earth. Lu Sheng opened the backpack in which he carried energy crystals and let it fall. Then he sat down, put his hands together, closed his eyes and concentrated, causing waves to begin to emerge from his body. As long as his strength was sufficient, he could face any type of crisis calmly. Lu Sheng's aura began to surround the energy crystals, and little by little they began to come out of his backpack and float. Lu Sheng concentrated even more and the energy crystals began to disperse across the bottom of the sea. Lu Sheng opened his eyes and his gaze fixed on his hands, making a smile appear on his face. Since the bottom of the ocean of the blue star reached its limit here, only in this place could he withstand the most extreme pressure to temper his martial body, his spiritual strength and his martial will to the absolute limit. His eyes began to shine with confidence, since now all that remained was to wait for the arrival of that guide. An excited smile appeared on his face because when that moment came, he was going to take advantage of the pressure from that level 10 warrior. Lu Sheng stood up and powerful martial energy began to emerge from his body. With this step, he could make the definitive leap into the true realm of 9th level martial saint. A few hours later, with clothes soaked in water, Lu Sheng came out of the sea and returned to the cruise ship. Snowy, who had now changed clothes, approached him, took him by the arm and began to show a kind smile, while Lu Sheng went out once every 7 days to replenish energy crystals and maintain basic contact with his family and army. He focused intensely on cultivating himself, with a dizzying improvement in power. A few days later, Lu Sheng descended to the bottom of the sea again and began to meditate once more, surrounded by strange fish. It was as if he had become that divine saint inside the coffin on the Golden Ring Island again. He saw within him growing increasingly powerful, constantly approaching the true critical line. While he was meditating, the spirit of a demon with glowing eyes appeared in front of him. During the process of his rapid increase in power, Lu Sheng also reflected on a question, and that was, what is truly his real martial appearance? Time flew by and 3 months passed quickly. In the death domain of the Desert and Lion Kingdom, all martial saints were there waiting respectfully for the arrival of the guide. The muscular martial saint began to look toward the sky, and his eyes widened with excitement. He revealed that the guide had arrived. The attention of Cumberland, who was standing next to him, fixed on the sky. Without wasting another second, all the martial saints knelt down, and not long after, golden energy emerged from the sky. Surrounded by a powerful martial energy, the guide descended from the sky. Cumberland also knelt before the guide and they all greeted him with respect. The guide was a being from another planet who wore a powerful yet elegant armor. He had 2 horns and a celestial halo behind his head. The desert was lifeless, without plants or water, only sand. But when the guide took a step forward, grass began to grow under his feet, consuming the sand. In an instant, the desert turned into a beautiful mountain with grass. The attention of the martial saints fixed on it, and their eyes widened in surprise, leaving them in shock. The guide extended his hand and with a smile greeted them back, saying that it had been a long time. The celestial halo of the guide changed color. From gold to blue, Cumberland's attention focused on him and his eyes filled with fear, realizing that the technology and power of the guide had evolved once again. The guide raised his hand and hundreds of capsules began to descend from the sky. He told Cumberland that he had brought everything they had asked for last time to trade. The capsules descended to the ground. Cumberland joined his hand with his fist and with a nervous gaze thanked him. With a cold expression, the guide made it clear that thanking only with words was not enough. One had to show it with concrete actions. He asked where the energy crystals were this time. Cumberland's eyes filled with fear. He tried to speak but was not able. The martial saints began to whisper among themselves. Cumberland lowered his head before the guide, and with his face full of sweat revealed that this time they had not been able to prepare the energy crystals. Just then, the grass and flowers that had grown in the desert withered. His attention fixed on them and his eyes filled with fear. The guide's body began to release an intense energy, capable of crushing all the martial saints, with eyes shining with rage. He asked why they had not brought the energy crystals. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part,